Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you guys are listening to us on, thank you guys so much as you tune into this episode in advance for all the support, the messages, questions, all the things that you keep sending the show's way. Just super excited always to get that feedback and hear from you guys about how these episodes have helped you, the things that you learned from it, questions that you have that you've asked as follow-up questions to my guests. It's just truly a joy to have all those interactions with you guys. So keep that coming, and super excited to talk about this topic today, which is about bringing value as an assistant coach. I think it's something that is so meaningful to continue to have those conversations because as head coaches, we have assistants on our staff, and we want to make sure that we're putting them in positions where they can contribute meaningfully, that they're bringing value, that they feel bought into the program. And I always think it's great to hear from somebody who has a lot of experience as an assistant about the things that they did, the advice they would give to head coaches in terms of how they best use, quote unquote, their assistants, and for assistants to know what they can be doing and what they could be advocating for in order to bring the most value that they can to the program as well. So that's what we're going to get into today. And I'm very happy to be joined by a longtime assistant coach who has now, as the saying goes, moved the chair over and is now the head men's basketball coach at Sherman High School. Coach Philip Manning is joining us here today. Coach, again, congratulations. And how are we doing today?
Oh, doing good, man. Thanks for having me, Coach. Super excited to be here. And hey, thank you for everything you're doing to grow the game. I really do appreciate this podcast, and I'm hoping that I can help some other coaches out there.
Definitely. I know this will be of value to me. I always loved, picking things out that I can use for my assistants personally so that they can be used better. So I know my listeners will, but I also know I will as well. So Coach, let's talk with your journey. So like I said in the onset, I know you have a long time assistant coaching experience. So talk us through where the game of basketball has taken you, where your coaching journey has taken you, and ultimately how you ended up at Sherman High School a few months ago.
Yeah, definitely. So really, I have an unusual journey of getting here. I was homeschooled growing up, and there's a lot of homeschool teams out there and things like that. But when I was coming up, not so many opportunities. But I love the game of basketball, and I just wanted to find somewhere where I could be a part of it. So I actually started helping out in my hometown at the high school there. Ended up coaching in college some of their spring and summer teams, and I was in Greenville, Texas. Then I graduated from Texas A&M Commerce. And my first teaching job was, 11 years ago, crazy, 2013, at Bells High School. Is a little high school, in fact, down the road from where I'm at now in Sherman. Just the way that first year, everybody knows it's just, trying to hit the ground running and trying to learn what being a coach is all about, and the time and the effort that gets put into it. It being a small school, I coached almost every sport. So that was really interesting. Then I went over to Sulphur Springs High School in East Texas. It's a 5A school. The biggest classification here is 6A. And I joined Clark Cipoletta's staff, who has been a huge part of my career. Owe a lot to Coach Cipoletta, and who's now at Allen High School. But I was his first hire. He got promoted to head coach. It was his first head coaching gig, and he was 26 and I was 24. And now all of a sudden we were part of a 5A program, one of the toughest regions in the state. And our first 2 years there, I think we combined, we won 19 games. But we really got into the middle schools and developing our younger classes. And over the course of the next 3 years that I was there, we ended up winning 87 games, won 2 district titles, and even 3 playoff appearances, and then made our state semifinalist appearance in the 2018-2019 season. That was such a special year, year you'll never forget. But then I moved over into the DFW Metroplex. After that, coached a year at Plano Senior High. So kind of went into that 6A level, and, Dallas and Houston, 2 of the biggest areas. Now, San Antonio and Austin too, but Dallas and Houston being 2 of the biggest areas of basketball in this state. So a very, very tough district. being at Plano, we were able to get into the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. That was a huge deal. And then I went up the road to Denton Braswell. It was their first year moving up from 5A to 6A. We were able to get into the playoffs too. We lost in the second round that year. And then Coach Cipolletta got the head coaching job at Allen, moved from Sulphur Springs to Allen, and called me up and asked me if I wanted to be a part of his staff. So I took his varsity assistant position, which ended up I ended as the associate head coach there. But I've been there in Allen for the last 3 years. In those 3 years, we've been able to go 83-26 and won 2 district titles there as well. Lost in the third round last year to Plano East, which nationally ranked, went undefeated, such a special team. So if you're going to lose, you want to lose the eventual champs, right? But obviously, solid year for us. And then this job opportunity opened up the road here in Sherman, Texas, which is pretty close to the Oklahoma line. It's Texoma is what they call it. We're in 5A classification, the same region that Sulphur Springs was in. So a very familiar region for me. And just a special place. We got a special opportunity to be really, really competitive this year. And I'm super excited about it. Great community, great kids. And I'm just blessed to be here. My career, I mean, I'm telling you, we're going over the accolades of the teams, but like players, they're the reason why we do this. They're what make success happen, right? So I've been blessed enough to coach 24 athletes that went on to play at the next level, 8 of them at the Division I level. So obviously that makes our job coaches. And one of them just went pro. He's playing in Eastern Europe. So I'm super excited for him. Super excited to see how that goes for him. So I don't know if that's a sign that I'm getting old or what. But play at at a professional level, just even a level above the next level, is a super, super blessing. And then obviously I can't go on and tell about myself without telling about my family. Me and my wife, Corinne, have been married for 10 years this year. And so very blessed for her. And and now all the coaches out there know that it's hard to do what we do without a support system. And I've got the best with my wife, my parents, my brother and his wife. I mean, they're some of the best support system you can ask for. I've got 2 daughters. I've got Claire, she's 3, and then Evie, who's 3 months old. My wife had her this summer, so it's been a whirlwind.
Wow, what a whirlwind!
Yeah, newborn, and it's keeping us on our toes, but we wouldn't have it any other way. So that's pretty much how I got here to Sherman.
Awesome. Fantastic. Coach, something I was thinking about as I kind of heard your story, and I was kind of curious about, because I know that there's probably some assistant coaches who are listening who might be looking to get that head coaching job or start to look for maybe getting in those interviews on the head coaching job. How did you kind of parlay that experience that you had with an assistant? How did you kind of bring that into an interview where you kind of were able to say like, hey, this is all my experience as an assistant, but like this is still, I'm the guy for a head coaching job and I can use and draw on this, and you should trust me that if you give me this head coaching job that I'll be ready for it. How did you kind of go through that interview process and kind of parlay that assistant experience to kind of prove that you would be a great head coaching candidate?
Well, that was no doubt the biggest question. If you don't have head coaching experience, and I've been in a handful of interviews, and like I said, finished runner up because I didn't have that experience. But I think the more you interview, the better you get at answering some of those questions. It's hard to answer some questions that you don't quite have experience on, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later too. But I think it's super important that as an assistant, you're communicating with your head coach that you want to be a head coach. And you want to work for head coaches that want to grow you as a coach. That way they can throw you into some experiences. And, like I said, Coach Cipolletta, he did such a great job of, knowing what I wanted to do, supporting what I wanted to do. And he would just throw things at me like, hey, have you done this before? Like, whether it be budgeting, whether it be an academics coordinator, whether it be, okay, hey, reach out to some of these college coaches, hey, look at our offense. Now, what can we do differently? Let's make some adjustments defensively. Lead up scouting. Literally every job, every responsibility that he was getting as a head coach, he wanted me to see it. And even, parent meetings, meetings with college coaches, he wanted me to be present in it. He wanted me, my face to get out there, my name to get out there, which was great. But he really wanted me to see firsthand what that experience was like. So it made it easy when I went into the interview room and, I'm trying to convince those administrators, well, it's no convincing when you can tell them firsthand that you've been in those experiences. And obviously, you have a head coach that can vouch for you that you've pretty much been and done every responsibility and as a head coach already. That makes it a lot more simple for them to go ahead and call you and offer you the job. And like I said, I was blessed that Coach Cordell did that here at Sherman.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, to your point, making your intentions know that, hey, I'm working towards eventually getting that head coaching job so that you
Mm-hmm.
can get that insight when you have a great head coach or who's going to be able to put you in those positions to get that meaningful experience. I mean, super helpful. No,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome that was an experience that you had. Coach, something else I wanted to ask you before we kind of really dive into the idea of bringing value as an assistant is I know you're a coach who really values defense, and I know that defense is something that you're passionate about. So I wanted to specifically ask you about the concept of defense, specifically man to man, because I know that that's something that you also are passionate about. So, talk in general about some talking points, some coaching points. What were some things that you really like to emphasize and make a point of significance when it comes to coaching or implementing a solid man to man defense?
Well, like you said, I'm super passionate about the defensive side of the ball, and the last handful of years, I've been at a few different programs. I've been the quote unquote defensive coordinator of our team, and the head coach has really empowered me to really take over that role. I think it's super important. Man to man defense obviously is the only defense for me. We won't even play zone defense at our middle schools. Now, we may throw in a zone trap. It's a little bit different, but in the half court, we will only play man-to-man defense because I think that kind of gets lost when you're, can win you games at the lower level, but at lower levels. But when you get to the varsity level, not going to win you quite as many games. Now, of course, every program is created differently. You got to mold, and that's the cool part about high school basketball is we kind of got to mold, in my opinion, our programs around what we have around the talent level and the skills and strengths of the athletes that are playing for us. So obviously, for us at Sulphur Springs, we were bigger. We had a bigger team, not quite as quick and agile, a lot more big. So we played more traditional pack line man. And then getting to Allen, and now what I'm bringing here to Sherman, a lot more athletes on the floor. Our ability to pressure the ball is a lot different. So we're pressing 94 feet. We can run and jump you, things like that. So I think what's super important is no matter where you are, you can play man-to-man defense. Your concepts should be the same. But I think there's a couple things like you got to know your nose. Okay. So for us, it's no arc. And so, arc for us is about 2 feet outside of each block, just above the charge circle in the middle of the floor. So we don't want to allow anybody into that, the ball into that, any possession. No uncontested shots and no second chance points. And so if there's any time in a drill where that happens, we're going to have reminders. Now at Allen, we had a trap bar set up with some weight on it, and you had to take a trap lap, pick up the trap, go from baseline to baseline, and that's your reminder. You allow to know. Here, don't quite have the trap lap handy, so we're resorting to bear crawls. We can go towel pushes, whatever, but you have to enforce. The players have to know your nose. Your coaching staff has to know your nose, and you have to enforce that every single day. What's important to you, you have to enforce. You can't say that you're about it and then not enforce it. And then again, that's what's your identity? A follow up to that. For us, ours is ball pressure. Ours is staying aggressive in passing lanes, and then over communicating. We are going to communicate the whole time, and I think some coaches, it's just ball, and gap, but there needs to be purposeful communication so that way you don't drown it out. And, the kids got to learn your terminology, whatever that may be. And, communicate early, loud, and often is what we say. And then a big thing that I think set us apart in Allen and what we're working on here to establish is working on our rotations. Now, I mean, yourself, how often do you spend of a game in rotation? A lot more than you would want to, right?
Yeah.
And and I'm not just saying, that's everybody, right? So I think it's super important to work those rotations on a daily basis and make sure that kids are playing every position. And we switch everything, so it makes it a little bit easier. But still, how you guard actions and working those rotations, that's super important, because that's setting you up for what's the most important, which is trying to get as many live reps in scramble situations as possible, because you're going to spend a majority of the game in transition, in rotations, in just a scramble situation. So the only way you can be prepared for something like that is to make practice 10 times harder than a game. So I was listening to a podcast, had a sports psychologist on it, and they were talking about in baseball, when you're trying to become a better hitter, that they did some research. A hitter that would hit 10 fastballs and then 10 curveballs, like, yeah, they might hit a fastball a little bit better if they're, they get 10 straight fastballs in a row, 10 straight curveballs in a row. But the best way to improve at hitting is to sequence them, right? You're throwing a curveball, you're throwing a couple fastballs. So that's what we try to do in practice. Is we're going to throw some curveballs at them. We're going to throw some surprises at them. Just because I think that really, really mimics what they're going to see in a game setting. And that's the only way you can get good at those rotations. And that's the only way that you can really emphasize what your knows are, what your identity is. And then you're going to hold your players accountable to uphold those standards. So there's got to be there's got to be bear crawls. There's got to be something to remind them what you value. So that way there's no doubt about it that by the time we get to scrimmage 1 in November, you're going to be able to ask every one of my players, what are our knows and what are our emphasis? What's our identity on defense? They're going to be able to describe it to you. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job as well as I could. So that's probably the advice that I would give if you're installing a defense today.
And I love the over communication part, right? I think as coaches, I know, I know, right? There's never enough communication. I always want them talking more. So, to me, that's one of my biggest emphasis is on communication, always talking. But like you mentioned, right, the talking has to be meaningful and making sure that, you're not just talking just to talk. And I love the idea of like, if you're not doing something, there is some sort of like consequence, like immediate, this didn't happen. So this
Mm-hmm.
is, whether it's a bear crawl or something like you said, there is some immediate consequence where players know like what's acceptable and what isn't. And it sounds like, as you kind of think about implementing defense, you kind of mentioned this, like when there's a mistake made or when there's something that's happening, there's like an immediate, okay, that you're supposed to do this and you didn't. All right, immediately that this is your consequence for it. You're going to do it, and then you got to get right back in there and fix it and get right after it the next time, sort of thing.
Well, and that's just, as teachers too, you're just taking
Mm-hmm.
do in the classroom and you put it into the court, right? So obviously not making anybody do bear calls in the classroom, but that might be a little bit something different for you. But
Yeah.
same time, like what you instill, what you defend, like the kids see, and it starts at the top, right, and it goes down to your assistants, like we're going to get to. But if your assistants and your players know what you emphasize, right, and that you are defending that and that identity and that culture that you're instilling defensively,
Yeah.
then it's just repetitive, right? You know what's right, you know what's wrong. And in a game that's filled with gray areas, you get a little bit of some black and white rules.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, definitely agree. All right, Coach. Talk about you've had a lot of different experiences, a lot of stops on the way that you've been an assistant for. So, kind of walk us through kind of all the different roles and responsibilities that you've been given or that you've advocated for in your time as an assistant, and what was kind of the relationship like in terms of like the expectations that you had for your job in regards to like how you and the head coaches were going to be working together?
So, I mean, I kind of got into this a little bit ago, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't be above any role that the head coach wants to give you. So first and foremost, I think like my expectation was to learn the head coach's expectations. And what I mean by that is like what they expected my responsibilities to be in practice and meetings and scouting. And then once I learned that, maybe I can advocate for a little bit more, or give my opinion on what I'd like to bring as well, and kind of meet in the middle. And like I said, I worked for 4 coaches that really helped me, and really kind of had different roles and responsibilities because we're all different, right?
Yeah.
And so whether it be with working with Coach Cipolletta, he was very passionate about skill development. So I learned a lot of skill development from him. But we had a conversation like, hey, what do you want to be like? You got to pick an identity. So with him at Sulphur Springs, I think I threw myself into scouting a lot, like scouting opponents putting together scouting reports and figuring out what other teams were doing offensively and defensively and preparing for us, preparing our team for us that way. And then I moved down the road, and then Plano, it was much more about skill development because I took everything I learned from Coach Sip and Coach Christian there just kind of was like, hey, you focus on all of our skills. You can coach some defense too, but we don't have a skills guy that focuses on details like you. So kind of threw me into that fire a little bit. That was a different experience. And then going to Braswell, it was a little bit different. I learned a lot of administrative stuff from Coach Sakaris. And then going back to Allen, it was a much more focus on defense because I was a little bit further in my career and had a little bit more experience, and so Coach Sip just kind of let me go there and take over one side of the ball and take over a bunch of different administrative things. So really, my first 7 years, I really just kind of focused on a couple different things, but when I got to Allen, I knew I wanted to be a head coach, and me and Coach Cipolletta kind of sat down and was like, okay, what do I need? What am I missing here? So we did a good job of give me responsibilities for academics, give me responsibilities for some administrative things, like things with the UIL, making sure our guys are eligible to play, bus request and putting in for referees and everything else that comes with that. And so really that was kind of what I was missing, was that administrative piece. And so basically these last 3 years, that's what I've been working on to fill those blanks. But I would say, you cannot get comfortable in what you're doing. If you're an assistant coach and you want to be a head coach, you've got to try to expand your roles. And even if your head coach, doesn't, maybe he wants to do those things, maybe that's in his wheelhouse, you can at least pick his brain and try to be a part of those conversations. Ask him why he's doing what he's doing. Don't just stand off. You'll never learn that way. So, give you that responsibility. Yeah. If he doesn't give you that responsibility, well, then ask to be a part of it and ask questions on how it works. Cause that's the head coaches I worked for. They knew I wanted to be a head coach. So they would have conversations with me like, hey, you're going to see this, look at this, and I was blessed to have that. And so that's what I'm trying to do for my staff. My assistant here, he wants to be a head coach one day. So I'm trying to do the same things for him that were done for me, and just throw the different, see what his strengths are, and then throw him to a couple things that maybe aren't a strength of his that he needs to grow in his career at. So that's what being a head coach is. You're growing your staff as well as developing your players. So I know my first couple years though, that's just from a coaching standpoint, but what I tried to do and what I tried to bring to my job is just building relationships with players. And that's a thing I've always been passionate about, is letting my players know that I care about them off the floor. And as we all know, like if they know that you care about them off the floor, on the floor is so much easier when you got that relationship.
When they're bought in.
When they're bought. Yeah, they know, and they know that you are invested in them no matter what. Like no matter the outcome of the game, you're gonna love them, you're gonna talk to them, and their well-being is at the first and foremost in your mind, and in their mind. So that's what's super important to me. So that's what I try to do at Sulphur Springs, and I know every head coach is different that you work with. And so they say good cop, bad cop, but not both of us can walk into the gym and be unapproachable and be all business. I think one of you, if not two of you, depending on the size of your staff, have to be approachable, and you can still hold kids accountable. But I think I took pride in my ability to take the pulse of the locker room, because I think coaches can kind of turn their nose up at that sometimes, and you lose the locker room. And they're just kids, I don't care, but you need to care. You need to care. And of course, kids are going to be kids. They're going to be mad you make them run. They had a bad practice. You're holding them to a higher standard of accountability. That's going to be tough. And so you got to walk that line a little bit, but at the same time, you got to know if something else is going on, or if you're losing kids in a different way, and your voice is getting drowned out. So I always took pride about being approachable and building relationships with those players, and then complimenting the head coach that you work for and not undermining him. I think there's a fine line.
Yeah, it can be tough sometimes.
It can be tough because players, head coaches, you might not see eye to eye with him, with what the head coach is telling this player. You never let that player know that. You got to defend your head coach. You got to be loyal, because that's your job. Your job is to build a relationship, but you still are a coach to player relationship with that player. You're not a friend. And I think that, some coaches can cross that line sometimes. And as an assistant, you're really caught in the middle because, you don't have full say over what's going on in the program sometimes. And it might be a tough pill for you to swallow as well. But the kids can't know that. You gotta be unified. And you gotta maintain your loyalty to your head coach. And then, whatever I took pride in whatever the head coach asked me to do, I was going to do it, even if I didn't want to do it, even if it included cleaning mustard off the walls on a Saturday while he's putting them through a shoot around because the Booster Club bought mustard and pretzels to serve at the game, and that was my thing. That became my thing on a Saturday. But you know what? Didn't like doing it, but guess what? Wash mustard off a wall for a Saturday.
Yeah, you did it, yeah.
And it's just part of it because, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later. But I think working for a head coach that would do it himself makes it a lot easier to do those jobs that you don't want to do.
Right. They would be doing it if they needed to. Yeah.
They've already done it,
Or yeah, they probably have.
And so, but it makes it harder when you know that he wouldn't do it. But anyway, and then learning their expectations and trying to be that, like Coach Zip always calls himself the culture protector as the head coach. Now I see in a whole new light what he means by that. But, trying to echo and trying to enforce and try to be that next in line to protect that culture and to enforce it every day. That was, I took pride in that as an assistant, in terms of, what his expectations were, like learning his expectations in practice, in player meetings, in parent meetings, and scouting. And then obviously like being able to communicate with each other as a staff, because again, you got to be able to practice what you preach to your athletes. Okay, I'm gonna say that again and again this time. But we tell our athletes, we tell them that it's super important that they're cohesive, that it's super important that they communicate at all times. That even though they don't have to be best friends, but they have to get along and they have to work as a unit. Well, why aren't we taking that same approach to our staff?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and so that was kind of like how I looked at being an assistant, my expectations, trying to learn his expectations and taking on roles and responsibilities there.
So when I'm curious about you talked about some of the different roles that you were given, whether it was you were working on, things about like, I'll just use like scouting, for example, because I'm always kind of interested in what does the conversation kind of look like when you're tasked with doing scouting to then now you're having a conversation with the head coach about what it is that you scouted. So how do you kind of take that, scouting report that you would have made as an assistant and then work with the head coach to kind of convey that information and maybe make a practice plan or some sort of game plan off of that scout that you developed?
And that's a good question. And I think, what's super important is doing a lot of work on the front end as a staff. So scouting can be, and answering some questions and scouting opponents. I'm going to have a completely different way of I think about it than the next coach. But I think it's super important to meet together before you even drop that first scout. What are we looking for on the scouting report? Like, let's pick out some questions that we need answered, that are important to us, that are vital to what we do and what we're going to need to know to prepare for. So I think if you have those conversations on the front end before you even communicate that's going to help you when you come in and you present what you have. That way you're not playing guessing games. And there's been times where I've been on the side of it where I feel like I'm trying to read the head coach's mind. I think it's super important for you as an assistant, as a staff, if a staff is working on scouting reports together, to obviously do that front loading work of what is important to us, what do we need to know about opponents, because then you can go and it makes scouting easy. I'm answering these questions, I know, and you can even like format. So we had our system in Sulphur Springs and Allen was super consistent. the way that we tagged things in huddle, okay, for offense and for defense and for special teams and for personnel, which made it really easy to create our playlist that we wanted the guys to see. And then, if you know the expectations and you communicated that from the beginning, it makes it super easy to just basically fill in those blanks. And it makes every scouting report, very similar,
Right.
So
Yeah. No, I really like that kind of idea of like having that plan in place ahead of time of like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Like, hey, I'm thinking as a head, in my head coach hat, like you're going to be scouting, you're going to be, making a game plan, but these are the kind of points of emphasis. These are the things I really want you to focus on, because then as an assistant, you really know kind of what you're looking for. Because if I tell an assistant to like, hey, I want you to scout, and I don't make clear definitions of what it is that means, my interpretation of what a scouting report would look like or what I would want to look for might be completely different than that
uh,
assistant's interpretation, and then they may come back to me and now we have like a scouting report, but it wasn't really what I wanted, and that's my fault because I didn't communicate really what it was I was expecting out of it.
yeah, exactly. And that's, man, communication is just super important. It's just the running theme of this. And
Hmm.
the more you communicate, the better off you are, because like really in the season, I mean, it's such a grind, and there's not very many hours, and you gotta
Yep.
be as resourceful and efficient with your time as possible. And so if you do some of this communicating, and you go over what you need at the beginning, well, now, because like you said, I've been in that situation before too, and now I've wasted 4 hours this week watching film, and I feel like it's unproductive to us being able to win. And here we go, like
All
players are
right, here go.
hour.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Players are coming in tomorrow. They want to know what we're going to do against this team. And now, we had two different ideas of
Hmm.
what we wanted to bring to a scouting report, and that's really, our job is to prepare them, right? So you feel like, oh, I'm not doing my job correctly, in that scenario. So yeah, being able to have those conversations, super important, and have a plan going into place. And really, something that we've done the last couple of years, we used to, a lot of people do it probably both ways. It's probably not even like innovative, but it was to us, where I would take we had three assistants on staff that scouted, the head coach and then two assistants. And so the way we used to do it is we would just take every other opponent. Each assistant would take both sides of the ball, personnel, special teams, and then Coach Sip would come in, and we would explain it to him, and he would watch them like the next game. We always stayed a game ahead, a couple games ahead. But the way that we kind of changed it up, I mean, because I felt super unprepared when we played a team that I didn't scout, and
Yeah.
I almost felt just like powerless on the bench. Like, you have a player answer your question. I'm like, I don't know. You have to ask,
So I wasn't
I,
ready for it. Yeah.
yeah. And so I'm trying, my best to stay ahead, and then just stay on who we're going up against as well. So the way that we combated that is we started splitting up portions of each scout, and then we would meet together, present to each other, and get on the same page. And oh my goodness, that made such a world of difference. All of
Mm-hmm.
us were prepared. So, for example, like last year on our staff in Allen, Coach Blakely took personnel. So he would bring in, that was his portion of the scouting report. And, we had a working document or working Google Doc where we filled in our portions and our responsibilities. Coach Olchek, our freshman coach, he would look at all special teams plays. So after timeout plays and end quarter, baseline, sideline, out of bounds, anything like that, he looked at that. And then Coach Cipolletta would look at what their defense was doing, how they guarded actions, and then I would look at what the offense was doing. I would draw up their top 5 to 8 actions or quick hitters that were pretty repetitive, maybe some actions that we would see repetitively. And then we would just meet. Like if we had a Tuesday game, we're meeting on Friday before our Friday game, and it seems kind of we meet Friday, but we meet Saturday morning to clarify some things. We'd have a preliminary meeting, but at least by Saturday morning before the guys came in, now we're meeting a couple hours before. Hey, we're putting this all together. What is our plan? Because Saturdays are lighter days for us anyway. And we would put this together so that way by Monday when we're ready to install and ready to really just put the game plan out there, how we were going to plan of attack. Everybody was on the same page. We knew the personnel. We knew what they did on both sides of the ball. We knew anything they had coming special teams wise. So that made a world of difference for us when it came to preparing for opponents.
Yeah, no, I know that's great. We really appreciate that thorough answer, Coach. S- s- Switching a little bit, I know that it's so important, for head coaches and all the great head coaches who I get a chance to talk to really emphasize how much that their assistants are looked at because they are as head coaches, and that anything an assistant says to a player is treated the same way that if it was a head coach saying it. And it's so important, I think, for assistants to be given the opportunity to have like their coaching voice be heard and be able to have that opportunity to lead and be somebody who the players are giving their full attention to and listening to and following, just like they would the head coach or any other coach. So talk to me about your coaching voice and how you were able to work with the head coach to get your coaching voice and be given time during practices or in game situations to be taking those leadership opportunities and putting on that almost like that head coaching role, so to speak, where
Yeah.
all eyes and all attention was on you because you were doing something, whether it was in practice or in a game.
Well, and it was super hard when I was younger. Coming in, I mean, I was 23 or 24, 25 years old, and I'm working with high school kids, and
Barely older than him, yeah.
yeah, you're not as confident. So time definitely does help. But obviously filling out your head coach is super important too, because you got to find out how you can get your voice heard, and how those opportunities are going to be created. So every head coach is either, in my mind, every head coach is either a micromanager or a macro manager. It's just like working for a boss in another field, right? You have a micromanager in practice, which no shade to Coach Sip, but he's a micromanager. He wants to run practices very structured around him and his voice. And it's similar to we went and saw Baylor practice a couple years ago, and Scott Drew was very much the same way. He runs practice, and his assistants, they'll run specific drills, which he would put me in charge of specific drills. We might split up, but at the end of the day, he's running practice. And so with him, I had to learn to coach between reps, because you never want to piggyback, right? Because it's going to turn the attention from the main point that he's trying to make. And like I said, you don't ever want to undermine your head coach, but at the same time, those players have to hear you. For you to have a voice in a game, the players have to hear you in practice first. And so otherwise, they're not going to trust you. They're not going to trust your adjustments, your critiques, any feedback you give them during the game. And they're not going to trust as much if you're just trying to do that during games only. So in practice, what I would do is I would with Coach Cipolletta is I would, interject if a player came off the floor, hey, come over here real quick. Let me tell you what I saw, and then, of course, adding those breakdown drills where we were apart, that helped a lot too. So really, that's kind of how I work. And then I've worked with, macro managers. Like I went and saw Buzz Williams practice at Texas A&M. He's very much a macro manager. He has his assistants running specific sides of the ball and those drills, and he comes in and he chimes in and he kind of oversees things. Well, a couple of coaches I worked for were like that. Coach Christian at Plano was very much like that. And so the defensive side of the ball or any skill work, hey, it was all me. I ran it. That, it was kind of interesting both sides because, seeing two different perspectives of it. Both of them gave you a voice in a game, but it was just a little bit different experience for both. So, like I said, super important to start and practice first and find your voice there so players will listen to you. But in games, I think it's super important as an assistant. I wrote down a couple things, and
Okay.
like I thought in my responsibilities in the games with my coaching voice and leading things, I look to protect the culture on the bench, because the head coach, as you're standing, as you're coaching, you're thinking about adjustments, you're thinking about substitution patterns, you might be thinking about a million different things. But if you're that assistant on the bench, you can see the body language of what the bench looks like, right? You can make sure that the guys are sitting together, that no one's spread out on the bench. You can make sure that no backs are up against the back of the chair, relaxing. You can make sure that everybody's standing for big plays and what you value. If someone takes a charge, everybody better stand up and celebrate. We had a big three because the bench can provide so much energy to the five players on the floor in the game. I took that as my responsibility to make sure that bench was bringing the energy that they needed to bring. And something that we always did, and it's a big part of our culture, is every single time somebody comes to the bench, subbing out of the game, they're going to slap hands with everybody on the coaching staff, everybody on the bench, the trainers, the managers. Okay, they're going to go down the line. They're going to slap everybody's hands. They're going to come sit down. That might be frustrating for a player that's coming out for a reason they don't want to come out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But
Definitely.
again, that's such a culture thing, and so that was my responsibility. I had to make sure that he did that, because that was super important to our culture of team over everything. We always break out to TOE. It was like that in Sulphur and Allen, and we're doing that here in Sherman too. But if you're really about team over everything, well, then you got to show it. And what better way to show it to everybody that's coming to watch our game than that right there? And so that was one responsibility I took on myself. And then look for adjustments, because again, when you're coaching, when you're standing and coaching, you see the game, but not quite as well as when you're sitting. And so I was always thinking of 1 to 3 areas of feedback I could give the head coach the very next time out, the very next end of quarter or halftime. I'm thinking of 1 to 3 things, and whether that is just like, okay, hey, we need to get this guy in there. Okay, this guy's hurting us. We need to take him out of the game. Whether it be an offensive adjustment that I see, a defensive adjustment that I see, maybe an emphasis on, hey, we're not rebounding well, we're not crashing, we're not blocking out, we're not sprinting the floor, don't see enough ball pressure. But at least having 1 to 3 things to say when that timeout was called, I could provide to him instantly. Because when you're in a timeout as a head coach, and I've had experience only a little bit, but I've coached my JV teams and things like that. But as a coach that's standing, when you're in a timeout, there's so many things that are going. Who do I want to get into the game? You're thinking of what hitter I should call next. But that's where I thought my role as an assistant was, to bring those little bits of feedback, those little sound bites of feedback that he could provide to those players really quick, first thing in the timeout. And then the biggest thing is in games and even in practices, you can't just, as an assistant, you can't just list problems. You got to bring solutions.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. Go ahead.
that's the biggest thing. Like I'm telling you, really all 4 head coaches I worked for, they don't want to hear about problems. It's super easy to list the problems. They see the problems. As an assistant coach, it's your job to suggest solutions. Like you have to bring solutions to those problems, because I'm going to tell you, Coach Christian in Plano, if you brought a problem to him, he'd be like, so how are we fixing it? And if you didn't have a plan to fix it, he was going to let you know about it. Because that's why you're here. You're here to bring solutions. You're here to help make my job easier. So I know that's not a long, thorough answer, but that's what I think is super important. Bringing your voice in practice. That way it connects to the games. The players take you seriously, and they accept your feedback, your criticism, and you go from there.
Well, I could just say to kind of the latter point that you mentioned, just as a head coach that I know in a game, I get like tunnel vision. I get like kind of lost in certain things, and I need somebody, there on the bench who's gonna just point out something that like I have a blind spot to. Like I'm kind of
Yeah.
aware during a game what my blind spots are, and where like I need to be like, hey, like what about, this particular player, or this, did you notice this or this certain action that they're doing, or taking advantage of this. And like I think as a head
Mhm.
coach, I think to know like in a game, like I'm going to try to have no blind spots, but I'm aware of where mine are and be able to say specifically like, hey, can you do me a favor and really make sure you're looking out for this and let me know, when X, Y, or
Yep.
Z happens. I know for me that's super important. I think for most head coaches, they should be, take some of the pressure off themselves and really task like you would in a practice, right? Task your assistant coaches for certain things that you really need them to look out for and suggest. And I think that's super empowering during a game.
No, 100%. I 100% agree. I think it's super important. And again, it's like the same thing that we talked about with that communication up front, just like in scouting. Like you said, you're emphasizing to your assistants what specifically you want them to work for and look for in a game. And
Mhm.
you being able to do that, and like you said, know your blind spots. That makes it so much easier to collaborate as a staff, right? Right. And that's super important, because like we explain to our athletes, like you have to know your role, right? So we each have roles as a staff, and we gotta define what those roles are, because then we can get the most out of ourselves when it comes to practices, but really even like games. I think, like you said, we kind of get lost in that in games, and we all just sit down and, hey, we're playing a game. But
Mhm.
if we do that work on the front end, and everybody knows what their responsibility is, and now it's your job, like, hey, it's my job to know that I need to be able to look for these adjustments. That's the value I'm providing to the team. And really what it does too is it creates ownership for everybody on the team, not just player, but everybody on the staff. You have an ownership, you have a direct, it matters to you. You are bought into what's going on. So yeah, I think that's super important.
I wanted to talk about now, you're human. You got your own voice, you have your own opinions. Head coach has their voice, has their opinions. Certainly not every time a head coach and assistant coach are going to be lockstep in agreement, nor do I think head coaches want there to be things lockstep in agreement. Now, you kind of alluded to this before if your answer about, bringing solutions to problems, but as an experience with an assistant coach that you have and all the different stops that you have, what's been the times and the solutions when there have been disagreements? How do you kind of collaborate and kind of work together when there's things that you see that you're like, coach, I really think we need to be doing this, whether it's in practice or in a game or whatever the situation is? How have you kind of navigated those times where there might be some disagreements or things where maybe you're not necessarily are on the same page about what you should be doing coaching wise?
Well, and that is a huge question too, because like you said, we're all human.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got an ego. We're we're in this profession for a reason. And coaches have a tendency to think they're right about everything. I'm guilty of that. My wife lets me know about that all the time. But but yeah, no, I think it's super important that number one, as an assistant, like you have to have thick skin, but it's really where loyalty comes in, and you got to know when and where. So as an assistant, you got to know when and where your opinion needs to be provided, and your body language and everything that goes with that. And really, as a head coach too, it's just as much on head coaches, and I'm seeing that now. As me and my assistant are collaborating, is I've got to be willing to be more open-minded to his ideas. Just like the coaches I've worked for, especially Coach Sip, were open-minded to mine. Now, at the same time, like I think that, again, getting out in front and talking about how we're going to communicate about disagreements from the get-go is going to help before you get tempers involved, before it's meaningful, before you're in like the heat of the moment of a practice, the heat of the moment of the game, and you might just pop off. But if you've talked about it before, about like, okay, hey, we've got to remain united in front of the kids, like in front of our athletes. They got to see us as a united front. Our foundation is solid. We're not cracked. Okay. We are emphasizing these things. And if you disagree, let's wait until we get back to the office. Let's shut the door, and we can disagree as heated as you want to get. And that's just called being a professional too. And that, but I think you got to have that conversation up front. And I know all of our tempers run hot. Sometimes you just got to walk away. Like I know we spend a lot of time together. We spend more time together than we do with our own families during the season. And so, when you're around each other a lot, like I have 3 brothers. I grew up with a brother. We're 13 months apart. And so there was times, we just got tired of being around each other, and that would cause a fight. But at the end of the day, it's super important that that those disagreements have to happen behind closed doors. And sometimes you got to agree to disagree, because at the end of the day, it's the head coach's program. You got to have thick skin and know what your role is. Your role is to make his job easier. Your role is to provide those solutions. And if he doesn't want to pick your solution, you can't get that. That's kind of the biggest thing that I've seen in other assistants too, as we've talked. If the head coach doesn't take their idea and use it, well, they're like, I'm just not going to provide an idea anymore. I'm not going to tell them what I think. Well, now you're going against what you're telling the kids or what you're telling your athletes to do, is, to keep trying to be resilient, right? To overcome that adversity. That might be a little bit, it feels like adversity as an assistant coach, but you got to keep providing those ideas, because that's your job. And if your head coach decides that he doesn't agree with it, and that's something that he doesn't want to do, well, then cool. It's his program. You got to know at the end of the day, it's his program, and you're playing a role in that, but your role isn't to make that decision. Your role is to provide that idea and that option. If it doesn't get taken, well, hey, I mean, I've had maybe, one idea to the 5 ideas that I've thrown out there get accepted and taken. But you know what? Like that one idea, I felt like, hey, I provided something today. I provided something to this program. So I think it's super important to be able to coexist, to work together, to develop that staff chemistry, to provide, really to set those boundaries of when those conversations need to take place, and where, and put your ego aside and collaborate with a person, and not see yourself as above them, and not scoff as a head coach at that idea that you're given. Because again, like I said, I think it's super important that your job as a head coach is to help grow your assistant into that role. And so how are you going to grow your assistant into that role if you shoot down every idea that you have? I think that's that comes from a place of, not being confident in yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You got to be confident in yourself as a head coach, that like you said, when it comes to in-game adjustments, to know what your blind spots are and to know where you're lacking a little bit and you need some help. That's the reason why you have a team of coaches working with you, and they're bringing their experiences and they're bringing their knowledge and their strengths. And that's your job as a head coach and a facilitator to bring that together,
I like the point, in particular about the idea of like, at the end of the day, we have to be unified in front of the players, because you think about the role as like an assistant coach. Your job is to assist the head coach, assist with the vision of the program, and like that ultimately is like the job that you agreed to do. And like at the end of the day, because that is your job, you are assisting with the vision of that head coach, assisting with the vision that they have of that program. And of course, like you said, you can disagree behind closed doors all you want, but I think especially, and I've alluded to this and talked about this with other guests too, if your players, and I'm sure you're well aware of this too, if your players feel that there's any sort of division or there's any way to pit coaches against each other and they can seize on that is a number one way for teams to completely fall apart, when they know that the coaches aren't on board and they can almost play them off each other, go to one coach, and they know that this coach will tell me what I want to hear and this other one won't, so I won't even talk to them. It can get real messy really quick, I know.
It can, and that's the thing is, you can have a special team, you can have a team that's loaded with talent. And if it's split like that, if you have a split on your staff, like the coaching staff is it's the literal foundation of your program. And if there is a crack in your foundation, I mean, so you're never going to be able to build anything on it. It's going to be weak. And when, the storms come and that adversity rises of the season, then, it's just whatever you're building is going to blow away. And so, like you said, you got to be unified. Even if you got to learn to agree to disagree. And again, know your role. Because otherwise, like you said, and I've seen it happen before too, where two coaches can disagree, and now it's just it just sows this division throughout the entire program, and nothing. It gets put on display when there's a crowd in the stands and a clock, the clock's on, and there's referees on the floor, and that is the worst time, because that's the time it's going to show is when you're in the fire like that.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Coach, last question here before we hit our concluding segment. You're in the head coaching role now. So now that you have all of this experience of being an assistant, now you're a head coach now. So how is your kind of coaching philosophy? How has it been kind of shaped by being an assistant? And how do you kind of imagine being able to run your own program now that you have all of this experience as an assistant to draw from?
So, I mean, we've kind of touched on some of these things earlier, but before I really get into it, my dad pastor for a couple decades, and he's retired now. But before he got into being a pastor, he always taught on what they call in the church is the ministry of helps. So essentially, people that are serving as ushers or greeters, and he would always teach on this subject, and I basically I live this out as an assistant. Now I'm actually getting to live the other part of it, which is kind of interesting. But you always say servants are leaders in training, and leaders never quit serving. And so that's kind of what I'm really just trying to put into work. And I've seen it. And especially, like I said, I've mentioned his name a lot, but I owe a lot to him, Coach Cipolletta Allen. When it comes to the servant leadership, he would never ask you to do anything he didn't do or wouldn't do. That's number one. They got to know that you're there for them. And then, I think, like I've touched on, this whole interview is communication. So you got to communicate things up front, just like you would with your athletes. You got to communicate how we do things. We got to be on the same page when it comes to culture, when it comes to terminology, because you're going to have assistant coaches At this level, you're gonna have them in the back gym. You're gonna have them in the oxygen working with your freshmen. You're gonna have them with your JV. You got to understand. They've got to understand and enforce what those expectations are culturally, what our terminology is. It's gonna make your job a whole lot easier when they get up to the varsity level. What your philosophy is on offense and defense, and then your job responsibilities, your expectations for them as a coach when it comes to their responsibilities during games, like we kind of talked about on scouting reports that we talked about. Communication is super important. And just like we talked about on defense, right? It kind of correlates. You want to over communicate. Well, you want to over communicate with your staff, what you expect from them. So you try to leave as little gray area as possible. So that's one big takeaway that I'm bringing from where I've been. And then, create buy-in. And, I always felt, working for Coach Zip, I was bought in and I was invested to the program. When we lost, I felt it, and I know as a head coach, you really, really feel it. Right. But as an assistant, I like to think that I felt that same exact, hurt when we lose, or, that fire that we gotta go in the next day and we gotta fix some things. So I want, and this is what Coach Zip always told me too, is I want my assistants to look, I want them to have an outlook of a head coach. Like, if you were in my chair, I want you to bring those solutions. What would you do today? What do we need to emphasize? Where are we lacking? I want, and I'm blessed right now. My assistant that I have right now wants to be a head coach. Like I said, Robbie Ritchie, he is, he's hungry. He's been a sponge trying to soak up some things that we're doing. But you know what? He's already taught me a lot in just a couple months that we worked together. He's brought some of his experiences in, and when it comes to skill development and some offensive and defensive stuff. So really just empowering him and being like, hey, well, what side of the ball are you comfortable with? Like, you go ahead and take it over. And he's already gotten his voice in practice, and I've let him lead some drills and things like that. And it's already helped on, a day that I had to miss our athletic period. Well, he's jumped right in and the kids are just following him. Right. So
awesome. Yeah.
Just trying to really just put him in that same position, create that buy-in where he feels totally invested in what we're doing. And I think, you got to give credit where credit is due, right? So if an assistant is working their butt off, you got to let them know that you value them. I think it's kind of, well, hey, you're doing your job. That's supposed to be what you're doing. Well, no, because they're still humans, and they want feedback too. They want to know that even if it's just flipping the laundry. Well, hey man, I appreciate you flipping the laundry, because that went so far for me as well. Like, when even if it felt kind of like, hey, you don't have to say thank you anymore. Like, we're washing laundry twice a day. It's okay. But at the end of the day, it did mean a lot that I knew that I was appreciated for what I was doing, and that it didn't go unnoticed. Everybody wants a little bit of credit and everybody wants a little bit of praise, no matter who you are. So make sure you're doing that. That's my goal. I think you can't be afraid of confrontation. And I think some head coaches are afraid of confrontation with their assistant. And, I've already talked to my staff too, like, hey, if you've got an issue, or if I got an issue with you, we're not going to hold it back. And of course, we're not going to come at each other angry. I think that's part of being professional, even though our tempers might flare up sometimes. But I think, we get behind closed doors. We got to be able to talk about what's between us. Because like we already alluded to, if there's some things that are being left unsaid, and, maybe you might had your feelings hurt about something that I said or did that I might have unintentionally done. Well, how can we fix that? We can fix that by communicating it and by confronting it head on. Because otherwise, because having a successful program and putting these young men that have been, entrusted into us in this sport of basketball in Sherman, Texas, is super important to me. That's the first thing. So if we can't communicate and work this out, then how can we do our job? How can we teach these guys how to problem solve and how to solve conflicts? And so that's kind of how I'm looking at my assistants. Like, it's my responsibility, like other coaches have done for me, to help them grow in the profession. And like I think that you made a good point, is knowing my blind spots and knowing where I have to get better and bringing their strengths into my weaknesses. So that way we can, be unified, cohesive, and really just, we're embodying team over everything for our players.
Yeah, it's so cool that you have like this really hungry young assistant coach. I'm sure you kind of look at him and probably just it's almost like looking at yourself from 11 years ago when you look at somebody like that who's sad, hungry, and wants to be a head coach as well.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal. And he's been doing this for 5 years now, and this is his first year as a varsity assistant. But I'm telling you, it's it's really fun because when you love the game, and I'm not saying every coach doesn't love the game. We do have a love for it, but when you're that passionate about it, and you really want to throw yourself in into what you're doing and be successful and do whatever it takes, like when you're around people that are as passionate about it as you, uh, it makes coming to work so much easier because you don't feel alone. You feel like, oh, I got somebody on board with me. I got somebody in the fire with me, and so man, it's made all the difference in the world, especially, establishing a different culture. And, where I'm at had a lot of success. Coach Hodges was here last year, and he did a great job of establishing a program. But, every coach is different, and every philosophy and culture is a little bit different. So to have an assistant that sees eye to eye with me and is already just passionate and focused
Hmm.
on what our culture is, man, it's
Yeah.
just a blessing to have.
Yeah, no, how invigorating and how exciting it is to have
Mm.
that much excitement bought in by all coaches. That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome, coach. To wrap up, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, and I'll start with this first one here. Thinking back on your coaching career, what is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think by listening our listeners, or excuse me, that you think by sharing our listeners would be able to learn from?
So, I mean, just kind of getting into, we've been talking about, taking that transition from being an assistant to a head coach. Well,
Hmm.
a couple years ago, Coach Tip had an emergency, and I served 7 games because we had a game, a tournament, and a game as the interim head coach. And so, at that point, I'd been working for him for it was my 7th year working for him, and so I'd like to think I knew exactly what he was doing and what he wanted to be done, And so I he'd always told me, hey, you need to approach this as a head coach. You need to come to work every day because hey, something could happen to me and it's going to be on you. You're the next guy. And so I always just like, yeah, but super eye opening when that actually took place, where, 7 games in the course of a week and I'm thrown into it. Uh, and so I think what really helped me was that advice and the way and that approach that I jumped in. I came to practice every day as, putting myself in the shoes as a head coach. Because then when that happened, I was prepared for it. Yeah, I was a little nervous. I'm not going to lie to you, especially, you feel like you're borrowing your best friend's sports car. We had a pretty good, a pretty good that year. We were pretty highly ranked, and we were playing in some very tough competitions, a tough showcase, and one of the best tournaments in the state. And but still, I think coming to work every day as an assistant for those 6+ years for him, and approaching it like that, like a head coach, I was super ready
Yeah.
when those responsibilities slid over to me. So, like I said, like go ahead. There's assistants out there that want to be a head coach. Come in with that mentality. Come into the gym every day thinking as your head coach. What would you do in this situation? Because you never know when that may be. That may be sooner than you think. So you need to just come prepared and prepare yourself for the job that you want to have one day. Like again, you never know the timing.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, to always be ready, right? Because that moment, if that's what you're working towards, right, that moment is going to come, and you want to make sure that you're ready for that moment, and everything that you're doing, either as an assistant coach is always, not only is it work that you're doing to be successful at the program you're currently at, but it's also building you up as a coach so that,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, when that moment comes and you're in that interview room, you already feel confident because you have so much to draw from, even if it isn't necessarily a coaching experience. You've done so many roles and responsibilities similar to that of a head coach that it's like, all right, I can do this if you give me a shot.
Yeah, you don't want to leave any doubt in their mind, that you're unprepared. You want to seem confident in what you're doing. And the best way to build confidence is to put yourself in those experiences, so I
Hmm.
100% agree.
To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest kind of what I call a 60-second soapbox, but you can go over 60 seconds. Don't worry, I'm not going to time you. But I want to give you kind of a platform to get out kind of a final message, a final thought, a closing idea, something just to leave the listeners with. And you could take it any direction you want, coaching or basketball wise. It's your soapbox after all. So, Coach, I'm going
Well,
to
you
go
know,
ahead and give you the
yeah,
floor and let you take it from here.
got you. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, staying on topic and it's stuff that we've alluded to before, but I think, the biggest problem that I've seen in programs around here, and it's a profession that that it's people are leaving. We got new people coming in, but I think it's super important uh, that we have to build cohesive staffs first, and we've talked about this whole interview. But I think I think head coaches sometimes put their nose up as, hey, I'm the head coach. You're going to work for me. You're going to do things for me. Well, you can't. And who I work for here, our athletic director here at Sherman, he always says, well, you don't work for me, you work with me. Right. And I couldn't agree more. I think there's too many programs that don't have that experience and that cohesiveness as a staff where, the head coach is working in line with the assistant coaches, and they're bringing value together, and they're playing up to their strengths, and they're practicing what they're preaching to their players. And I know I sound like a little bit of a broken record for the interview, but I'm super passionate about it, because I think that that's a secret ingredient to success that people aren't really tapping into. Obviously, don't get me wrong, player development, having good players, getting players to buy in, super important. It's going to be about the players, but we're forgetting about the staff and about who you're entrusting to develop your younger players, who you're entrusting to help you maintain your culture and your values. That's super important. I don't think that you can grow your players and develop your players and build your system and establish your culture like you want to by yourself. You can't do that. Nothing was ever built solo. So I think it's super, super important that, there is more cohesion on staff and the ability to work and collaborate together and to put your egos aside. Because again, like I said, it's a missing key ingredient to a successful program. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
No, awesome point to end on, Coach. And thank you so much, man. You shared so much, and it's gotten me thinking a lot about things for this year for me as well. And it's really really cool to hear how much pride and how much excitement you took into being an assistant, and just how this has served as just an amazing launching pad for you now as you start your head coaching journey out here at Sherman. I'm really excited to kind of follow along with your journey. So again, thank you so much for everything that you shared. Best of luck this coming year. I know you're super excited, super ready to go, and I know you're going to treat your assistants well, so to speak. So, Coach, again, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Best of luck this coming year.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be on this podcast. And again, thank you for everything that you're doing for the game, and good luck to you this year too, Coach.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.